It's a true pleasure for me to welcome my friend, Professor Rona Kaufman, to Temple Ohav Shalom this evening. Rona is one of Pittsburgh's own. She's a professor of law at the Duquesne School of Law. One of your students, Rona, is here. And she's as well a nationally recognized voice on contemporary anti-Semitism, and more specifically, the scourge of anti-Zionism. Her scholarship and public writings have helped to shape an urgent national conversation about how the rise in anti-Zionist thought insidiously has entered and operates within our culture and politics, particularly in academic and progressive spaces. We've entitled her talk tonight, Why Anti-Zionism is Anti-Semitism. Admittedly, it's a bold topic, bold title, and intentionally so. After all, we find ourselves living at a time when distinctions between related yet independent ideas are flattened, when moral categories have been blurred, and when hostility toward the state of Israel, toward Jewish self-determination, and toward individual Jews is often repackaged as ordinary political critique. Of course, Israel, like any nation, may be criticized. Zionism, like any political philosophy, may be debated. Individual Jews, like all people anywhere, are accountable for their own actions. But when the legitimacy of the Jewish state alone is denied, when Jewish national identity is singled out as uniquely suspect, something more sinister is at work. For what appears to pass as legitimate political discourse and critique can, and in fact does, function as a vehicle for something far older and more dangerous, namely anti-Semitism itself. Such hate rhetoric, left unchallenged, inevitably shapes campus climates, workplace environments, civil political debate, and the public confidence with which Jews are able to express our identity. And silence in the face of this corrosive reality, silence or simply hoping things will change and this too shall pass, carries serious and long-lasting consequences. But what to say? For this reason, I'm especially grateful that Dr. Kaufman is here to help us engage this moment with clarity and seriousness and courage. Please join me in welcoming Rona Kaufman to Ohav Shalom.
I think I put it on. Did I put it on?
I think you're on.
All right, good. Well, thanks for having me here. Honestly, it's I've never been to this synagogue, and first of all, it's beautiful and very like Jerusalem-y behind me. And I don't really know anyone here other than the two people that I know that came. But I don't know any of you. So, you know, when you live in Pittsburgh, especially in Squirrel Hill, you start thinking that you know every Jewish person that lives in Pittsburgh, but apparently I don't. So it's nice to meet you all. I have something prepared, but I'm also really flexible and open to kind of shifting the conversation. So I think I was planning to start by actually talking a little bit about Zionism before talking about anti-Zionism. If you hate what I'm talking about or you have some burning questions about something else, feel free to interrupt me. It's a nice intimate group and we could have more of a conversation. If not, I'll just kind of share what I thought I was going to share, and then Rabbi and I can sit and have a conversation and you can ask questions. And so I'm not from Pittsburgh. I'm going to introduce myself a little bit more. I'm from Philadelphia, and I was raised by Israeli parents in Philadelphia. That's Jamie, my best friend from growing up, who's also from Philadelphia with me. And I moved to Pittsburgh in 2010 to come to Duquesne to be a professor. I was a lawyer before that in Houston and did some other work, and then I came here to be a professor. I have 3 kids. My oldest is 22. She was a lone soldier combat unit during this war. And then my son is 20, and he's a Duquesne student. And I have a 17-year-old who is still in high school. I spend a lot of time in Israel. My parents are Israeli. My grandparents were Holocaust survivors who all moved to Israel in 1948. And so during my childhood, I went to Israel regularly. Almost all of our family was in Israel, except for my mom's parents and her brother, and then my dad, who she pulled with her from Israel so she could be near her parents. And then even when my kids were growing up, my sister married an Israeli, and so we would take turns in the summers. She would come here in some summers with her kids, and I would go there. Now she lives in Philadelphia with all of her kids, but for a while they were back and forth. And then my daughter moved to Israel. And since she moved to Israel, I'm there even more, and especially during the war. So since the war started, I don't even know how many times I've been to Israel, but I've been there for long periods of time and also just on short visits. I went on a law professor mission trip where I had the incredible opportunity of meeting with lawyers and members of Knesset, the parliament, the president of Israel, just leaders of all different aspects of society, Palestinians, Ethiopians, Druze, Jews, just on kind of a fact-finding mission almost. And then I actually led a trip like that with 23 faculty, not just law, but mostly law from around the country. We went in November, and I think that was my last trip to Israel. I'll be going back in March. So that's a little bit about me. Before October 7th, I didn't do this professionally. I didn't do Jewish things professionally. My job was totally secular, and I was involved in my Jewish community. I served on boards. I went to synagogue on rare occasion, and did my part. But I was teaching law. My area of law was feminist legal theory. I taught employment discrimination for many years, constitutional law, family law, gender in the law, and that was my area. And that's also a really progressive liberal sphere of legal study, and that was always my home. So this is new that this kind of point that you made about politics, for me, this isn't political. This is Jewish. That's it. I used to really strongly identify politically, and I actually don't identify politically at all anymore. I just identify as Jewish and as a mom and sometimes as a law professor, but those are really my core identities at this point. So I shifted all of my scholarship after October 7th, and I started shifting it actually a little bit before, because in academia, I'm part of these listservs of women law faculty. And so I'm on a listserv with over 2,000 women law professors. And that listserv had become increasingly anti-Israel over the years. And I was chair of that section. So it's all the women law professors in the country. I chaired that section in 2019, 2020. And then since then, and even then, there was a little bit on the listserv, but since then it had become more and more anti-Israel, and in my view, anti-Semitic. And after October 7th, it really exploded. But even leading up to October 7th, there were already a lot of emails being sent across there, and they were constantly going after Israel. Basically, the first sentence was always settler, colonial, apartheid, genocide. That was all in the first sentence. And then it would go on to say whatever it had to say. After the war, when I was in Israel, actually, kind of up all night worrying about my kid, and I started responding to these emails. And it turns out that it takes, I can tell you from experience, it takes 8 pages to respond to that sentence. That's how long it takes, 8 pages. And it's not even that great of a response, because really it takes probably thousands of pages to respond to that sentence. And it didn't matter. My responses, it didn't matter. I was immediately, called all sorts of names for those responses. In any event, I started to really focus actually on the legal scholarship when it comes to Israel, when it comes to specifically feminism and Zionism, and some kind of what the connection there is, because a lot of the conversation on this listserv was, you cannot be a feminist if you're a Zionist. That was the indictment. Because that means that you're a genocidal maniac who hates women. And if you're a genocidal maniac who hates women and Palestinian women, then you're not welcome here. And because my area of law was feminist legal theory, that's where I really started focusing my initial attention. And I ended up studying Zionism for a very long time and writing about Zionism from a feminist perspective. So I'm going to talk to you about Zionism, not necessarily from a feminist perspective, but I really studied it from the feminist perspective in order to really just explain my existence. All of my scholarship and my entire professional career, whenever possible, is autobiographical. When my kids were little, I wrote about intersections of motherhood and law. Now, suddenly, I found myself writing about intersections of feminism and Zionism. So Zionism, right? I thought I knew about Zionism, and I knew a little bit, and I don't know, you might know more than I knew, but I understood it as kind of like this movement that started in the late 1800s, and Theodore Herzl was the leader of this movement. In fact, on my father's side, we are related to Theodore Herzl, and I knew that as a kid, like, wow, we're like really close to the whole Zionism thing. He started this movement, and over time, it gained some traction. Then, of course, the Holocaust happened. That was really, really bad. And that, if anything, it proved the need for Zionism. And that was the story, and it was very much a men's liberation story. During my research into this as feminist legal theory, I really started looking at what Zionism meant for Jewish women and how important it is for Jewish women, because basically up until we have a state of Israel, things like October 7th happened all the time. And the terrible crimes against women and girls happened all the time, and there was no recourse. It was just the next day, just came, and that was it. But Zionism is actually a much deeper story. So what I just described is political Zionism, and that's part of the story of political Zionism. It really started earlier than that, and it was very much inspired by other national liberation movements and the idea of self-determination, which was a European philosophy, came out of European philosophers in the 1700s. This idea that people should rule themselves, which if we think back was really like revolutionary. People didn't rule themselves before. There was no such thing as self-determination. People were subjects of a king or an empire or whatever, and didn't really have any self-rule. So this idea of self-determination arises. Nationalism is also arising a little bit before. They kind of blend together to some extent. And the Jews living in Europe say, this sounds like a good idea, maybe for us too. Us too. Maybe we too should have some kind of self-determination. And that becomes the political movement. And Zionism, really, we define it as the belief that the Jewish people are entitled to self-determination in our ancestral and indigenous homeland. That's how it was defined before the State of Israel came into being. After the State of Israel came into being, we added on and the maintenance of that. So now we have the state, so we're just going to kind of keep it. Everything's going to stay as is. But really, Zionism is based on not just, this is political Zionism, but there was Zion before Theodore Herzl and before the 1700s and before non-Jewish European philosophers, were coming up with these ideas. Only it was spiritual. It was the spiritual longing, right? And it didn't, for the most part, other than a few during the history of our people, a few leaders who maybe thought they might be the next Messiah, not the next, just kidding. A few people who thought they might be the Messiah that started kind of suggesting like, hey, we should all go back to Israel. But the idea of spiritual Zionism was that God would bring us back, that we were in exile for divine reasons. It was a punishment. We're in exile, and eventually God will return us to our land. But everything about our peoplehood, everything about our religious practice, so much about it was so deeply tied to the land of Israel, right? Zion means, it was the name of a hill in Jerusalem. Eventually it came to mean Jerusalem, and then eventually it came to mean really all of Israel. And this idea that we are spiritually tied to this land, it's not an idea. We are spiritually tied to this land. We see it throughout our liturgy, the number of times that we say Zion, Jerusalem, Israel when we pray. We see it in so many of our holidays, the holidays that we say next year in Jerusalem, whether it's in Pesach or Rosh Hashanah or Yom Kippur, but also in Tu B'Shvat, where all of the trees that we're focused on are trees that grow in Israel. Also, if you live in Pittsburgh, you know that Sukkot, not meant to be practiced in this part of the world, right? Like this idea that we're going to be in a sukkah and it might even snow. I mean, we are tied to that land. More than half of the mitzvot cannot be fulfilled outside of the land of Israel. So, and I think that's really important. This idea that Zionism isn't just a political movement, and it's important to understanding anti-Zionism as well. It's not just a political movement. Yes, it is the political manifestation of our peoplehood and of our spirituality. And in some ways, it's so deeply tied to our religion. And in other ways, the fact that, for example, there were anti-Zionists when Zionism was a political ideology before the State of Israel, who were Jewish anti-Zionists, who were anti-Zionist for religious reasons. So there's this interesting relationship between Zionism and Judaism in terms of the politicization of this longing. Fast forward to anti-Zionism. It's my contention, not just mine, many other people as well, but not everyone agrees, that anti-Zionism is inherently, I don't even call it usually anti-Semitism, I call it Jew hatred. And this is based on studying Jew hatred. That, we call it anti-Semitism. Anti-Semitism is the most recent form of Jew hatred that essentially almost decimated our people. And so, just kidding. So it became the term that we use as synonymous with discrimination against Jews or hatred of Jews. But really, it's a recent term. For thousands of years, the version of Jew hatred that was dominant was anti-Judaism. I don't know that it was really named. It was named different things in different countries, but it was against our practice, or at least the idea was it was against our practice, it was against our religion, it was against our belief system. The first pogrom that's recorded, and it's really not the first pogrom also, it's a word that was more recent, but we can use it to refer to things that happened way before there were Jews in Russia. The first documented, I guess Jewish historians document as having been a pogrom, what happened in 32 CE in Roman-controlled Alexandria in Egypt. And that pogrom was motivated by a lot of things, some of them political, but also the fact that these Jews who were living there were godless, actually. They thought we were godless because we were worshiping an invisible God. So they actually were offended by our godlessness. And worse, we were sacrificing animals. And the animals we were sacrificing were their gods. So there's actually an earlier version of us killing God than the story of us killing Jesus Christ, but it's actually us even killing Egyptian gods from way back, 32 CE. Anti-Judaism is, responsible for libels, the famous ones, that we kill little Christian babies and drain them of their blood and make our matzah, and that we poison wells, and that we worship the devil, and that we kill God, all of those, the old ones. The ones that today, it occurs to me, today, they sound so silly, right? Like I really struggled with this idea that one of the good things that has happened since October 7th is that I understand my Holocaust survivor grandparents in a way that I never did when they were living. I didn't understand. I thought people were stupider back then, because the people who killed their whole families believed these crazy theories about Jews, these crazy ideas that make no sense. So I thought it couldn't possibly happen in my time because we were more sophisticated now. And now I see that they're more sophisticated too. And that actually when I'm comparing today's sophistication to the primitive ideas of the past, when in fact, in the past, they weren't primitive at all. They were also sophisticated, right? And so anyway, we had anti-Judaism, thousands of years of anti-Judaism, thousands of massacres of Jewish people, expulsions, all the bad stuff. We end up in exile. We're all over the world. We're all over the Middle East. We're all over Europe. We're even in India, in Africa, all over the world. And then 1870s, anti-Semitism shows up. And anti-Semitism is a brand new idea. In fact, it's very much a departure from the idea of anti-Judaism, because Wilhelm Marr, this German guy, he's intellectual, he's sophisticated, he's not interested in this hocus pocus nonsense that comes from the church. He wants to really distinguish himself from that stuff and say, no, I'm a scientist. Like, we're in the time of science, and the Jews, they're not bad for all these ridiculous reasons you've made up, though your instinct is correct. They're bad because they're a different race. They're a subhuman race, right? And that's the thing of the time. Eugenics, that's the thing of the time, not just in Germany, in the United States as well. This race science was really believed to be truth. And we were the bad guys in that version of truth. And of course, we know how that all ended. And nobody today, I mean, it's so not mainstream to defend anti-Semitism. In large part because it was proven to be really bad, right? Being a Nazi is bad. Nobody wants to be a Nazi. Anti-Zionism arrives on the scene. It's not clear when it arrives. There's actually a lot of historians right now who are trying to identify that moment when it arrives. But we see it in Soviet propaganda. And we definitely see it very strongly post-1967 in the Soviet Union and in Poland, and that's because maybe in response to Israel winning the 1967 war, and suddenly it was perceived as a little bit too strong, and there's all sorts of complicated political reasons for that. But anti-Zionism also, of course, exists in the Middle East. And by the way, anti-Zionism in the Middle East, if you're not familiar with that version of it, it is anti-Zionism, anti-Judaism, and anti-Semitism all rolled into one. There's no separation. The Islamist perspective on Jews, we are hated for on all three of those bases. But anti-Zionism as an ideology, it denies our history. It's really interesting because some people think of anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism as two different sides of a coin. Anti-Semitism separates us. We're different. We are a different race. We are a separate people. We come from Palestine, go home, go back to Palestine. And it villainizes us for that and demonizes us for it. And then anti-Zionism takes all of those things and says the opposite. You're not from here. You don't come from here. This is not your home. You are not a people. You are white, European colonizers who have come to a land you have no connection to, stolen it from the people who actually live there, and now are killing all of them. Anti-Zionism, the part where we commit genocide in anti-Zionism, which has been around since well before October 7th, before this war, claims of genocide, charges of genocide were very common. They weren't as successful, but they were very common. That charge is actually especially interesting because it's very popular in Europe, more popular in Europe than in the United States, where it really absolves the Europeans of the Holocaust. There's very much you see, they're genocidal maniacs. We knew it in our gut. We were right. We were right. We should have done a better job of finishing them off when we had the opportunity. Anti-Zionism's ties, there are people and there are organizations who talk about it. First, I heard it as the Red-Green Alliance, which is the alliance between Soviet ideology and communist ideology and Islamist ideologies, but it's actually red, green, brown, and brown is Nazism. So, anti-Zionism is the third phase. It was anti-Judaism, then it was anti-Semitism, and now it's anti-Zionism. And while anti-Semitism, some people say I've said this before, anti-Semitism is Jew hatred for racists, and anti-Zionism is Jew hatred for anti-racists. It takes on the language of human rights. It takes on the language of progressivism. It takes on the language of, the underdog and protecting all people. But somehow it ends up being the same. So the last thing I'll say is that the story, not a story exactly, but the comparison that made me know this or understand this way before October 7th was October 27th, 2018. So when Tree of Life Synagogue, when that attack took place, I was in the category of people who was not surprised. I think a lot of Pittsburgh Jews and American Jews were kind of divided. Those who could not believe this could happen, and those of us who have been waiting for this to happen. And so probably just because of my Holocaust survivor and Israeli parent, I've always been waiting. I never understood as a kid why in the movie theaters you had to go through metal detectors to go to movie theaters in Israel, and here no one was exploding themselves. And so I was in that category. But what I really found striking was how we were so loved, right? We were so held. We were so cared for by Pittsburgh, by the Steelers, by all of the United States of America. And it was as if there was no justification for killing Jews in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. And what's peculiar to me about that is that so often, even in my own Jewish community, so often when Jews are killed in Jerusalem, that makes sense. And the idea that Jews have more, that if it happens here, it's anti-Semitism, it's Jew hatred. If it happens there, it's justified somehow. This idea that we, a people who, it's not mythology, it's real. We come from there. That we have more of a right to be here in Allison Park, than in Jerusalem. That's crazy to me. Thank you.